happening, everybody? You know what the hardest part of doing these shows is figuring out how you're gonna start the show.
Yeah, like that first thing you're gonna say.
Yeah, like like as soon as it comes on, it's like you always like, all right, what's the first thing I'm going to say? So we were just talking with Patrick in the green room, and so what happened was Tan was supposed to send out 2 copies of the book, and they sent 1 copy to Rob, and Rob's not the one who prepares for these interviews. I usually am. And Rob has an infant at home. But I wound up buying the book on Kindle, and I've read 2 chapters so far, and Rob's been banging through the audiobook. But I really do want to get to Patrick's story a little bit before we even get into the book. So, Patrick, were you raised Catholic? Are you a convert? What's your story?
Yeah, so I grew up a cradle Catholic, and just going to mass every Sunday. But I would say for most of my life, it was I put my sport, athletics, and academics above God. And then it wasn't until in college, I had a roommate that started going to daily mass, and that I just saw his joy. I was kind of just striving for the world's glory, and I saw like I want that peace. And so that kind of just led me to a reconversion, you would say. I didn't go like off the rails, and I wasn't. I think my dad put the fear of God in me growing up, So, but I think just having that, just appreciating the Eucharist more, and that kind of led me. And then I joined a monastery for a few years, and then that didn't work out. I thought I was supposed to be a monk, and I was there for about 3 years, and then a year later, about actually 2.5 years later, I went to Franciscan, because that's where you go to find a wife, right? And I went there, and that's where I met my wife, and but and part of this book, we'll get to, but just that experience of being, I know what it's like to be rejected several times, and so I that's kind of, anyways, one of the reasons why this topic of meeting your wife, it's kind of.
I'm going to tell you something. So Rob lives in Minnesota. I live in New York, hundreds of miles away, and we decide let's do a meetup in Steubenville. So we went to Matt Frad's cigar shop opening, and
last October,
and we go to Steubenville. And while we're there, like I remember standing there, and there was like all these like young people around, and I'm like, where are your wedding rings? Doesn't everybody in Steubenville get married at like 19 or something? Because everybody goes to Steubenville to meet their spouse. But you told a story right in the opening about when you met your wife. That was like, you really knew, like, wow, I want to marry this girl right away, right?
It was actually, it wasn't love at first sight, but there was something like, there was this indescribable sense of peace that I had around her. It's like something's different about her. But then, being the nice guy that I am, I actually tried to set her up with one of my friends. and then, because they were both my wife's from Wisconsin, and my friend was from Wisconsin.
Oh, no.
And so...
Wisconsin.
And then eventually after, it was like I would actually put it this way. I would time myself, like after mass, if I wanted to meet a girl, I was like, I would just set it up perfectly. Like I'm going out at the same time, and it never worked out. And then I just gave up. I'm like, Lord, I'm done. And then my wife and I was like, same time, like we walked out, and I'm like, wow, this is like, I didn't even have to try, And so, yeah.
I've known my wife since we're 13, and I've told a bunch of stories, but I knew when I was 16 years old, I was going to marry my wife. Like, no joke. I knew at 16, 17 years old, like I knew, okay, this is the girl I'm going to marry. So I kind of related to that. Just, like I don't think I've ever told another girl other than my mother or sisters or my daughters that I never said I love you to anybody but my wife. So it was, it was interesting to see that other people have had similar experiences where as soon as they meet their spouse, they know they want to get married.
We should probably mention the actual name of the book we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Terrible.
First, I'll go through the official bio for Patrick that I was given here. So if this sounds pre-written, it was. But so Patrick here is an author, a brand manager at Holy Heroes, and a freelance editor, previously serving as Tan Books acquisitions editor for 2 years. He grew up in the Midwest and spent close to 3 years in a Benedictine monastery before discerning the call to marriage. His first book, Nursery of Heaven, Miscarriage, Stillbirth, and Infant Loss in the Lives of the Saints and Today's Parents, which he co-authored with Cassie Everts, was released in 2019. His second book, Parents of the Saints, The Hidden Heroes Behind Our Favorite Saints, was released in 2021. The latter book took him over 3 years to write. His first children's book, The Shepherd at the Crib and the Cross, was released in 2022. He graduated with a master's in education from Franciscan University of Steubenville and a bachelor's in marketing from St. Ambrose University. And
right. We're gonna have
the
to,
book.
yeah, we have to do a Spiritus thing also, but right off the bat, as soon as we mentioned that we were interviewing Patrick, somebody responded to my tweet and said, Patrick set me up with my wife. So Patrick's a matchmaker and he's writing books on it. Now that first book, was that Jason Everett's wife that you co-wrote with?
It's actually Everett, so it has an S, but I would love to write a book with Jason Everett someday, possibly, yeah. So, but no, it's not his wife.
Oh, okay.
Everts, not
Oh, Everett. I thought you said Everett. Okay. Okay, Rob, you have to play the Spiritus thing, right? You want to do that?
We'll do that real quick.
Are you tired of searching YouTube for something that won't make you run to confession? Let's talk about the Catholic video alternative platform, Spiritus TV. Spiritus TV is the only video platform that is guided by Catholic morality. That means you will not have to worry about the influences of modernity on you and your family. In a time where YouTube is promoting whatever flavor of the month degeneracy, and all these supposed alternatives are the same thing with a different coat of paint, Spiritus TV is here for you, your family, and the faith. Check us out at spiritustv.com. That is spiritustv.com.
So that's our friend Rick Barrett doing the voiceover on that. But Patrick, so most of the time the saints that we hear about are always like monks, priests, things like that. Did you focus a lot on married saints in this book?
Yeah, so the whole book is married saints, but there's some that, I mentioned, I use that phrase, talk about life after marriage, but religious life after marriage. There's a few of them that entered religious life after their spouse passed away. So like Saint Rita of Cascia, and then there's Saint Francis of, one of the Saint Francis Borgia. He was like one of the highest Jesuit saints, but after his wife passed away, he entered in there.
What was it? Was it hard to find a lot of married saints because you don't hear about them very often? Did you have to do a lot of digging?
I did, and actually, I was able to. Some of the more common ones, I was able to interview Saint Gianna Molla's daughter, and that was kind of like the highlight of
That's amazing.
of this project. And she like handed me over all this research of her mom and dad, and but the other ones, there was a lot. Like I use a lot of servants of God. Like there's this one guy, Trancanelli. Vittorio Trancanelli. He's a servant of God. He was a medical doctor, and I was able to interview the postulator of canonization for him in Italy, and I believe he'll be a saint someday. But him and his wife had difficulty having children. They had one child, and then they ended up adopting 7 children, and a lot of them with special needs. But the guy was just a holy man. Like he would do surgeries, and in between surgeries, he'd be meditating for like 15 minutes, and they even adopted a Down syndrome child at the end of their life. One of his nurses was dying and said, "Would you consider raising my daughter?" And I just don't know too many doctors or people even today that if someone came to you and said, "Hey, would you like to like adopt my Down syndrome child?" I mean, it's heroic love there.
Yeah, it's like I really think like most of the saints are going to be married when we get to heaven because they're hidden lives, right? Like it's hard to develop a cult around a married person because they really only touch their family. So the way a saint really, or a canonization process starts is when there's a cult around that person because that person happened to touch the lives of a lot of people and people ask for their intercession. But it's rare where a married person has that effect on people because they're tending to their family. So it really is a hidden holiness that we don't see very often.
And it costs a lot of money to get someone time and money. And people, like children, don't have, like you and me, like we don't have that time. Like if our parents were to die, and that's why like these religious orders can take it upon. And I think the reason, I feature St. Teresa's mom and dad, Louis and Zelly Martin, and I think the reason that helped with them is, their daughter was, 5 of their daughters were nuns, and they wrote actually a biography on their parents. And so that kind of spread their devotion. And then you just see the holiness of the children. And that's what we're seeing. Like In my other book, I wrote Parents of the Saints. Like you see what like John Paul II's parents are up for canonization. Like, we say the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And I think that this is the case. Like I argue that I think some of these saints, like even the parents of the saints, were holier than their children. It's just, they weren't as well known. They're hidden.
Yeah.
I mean, we heard from John Paul II that one of the things that really inspired him growing up was waking up in the middle of the night and seeing his father kneeling and praying, at the side of his bed.
So what made you focus on the courtship angle of it? Because obviously most people are used to dating nowadays, right? Like they meet somebody, they date, a lot of it's online. Like I feel horrible for you younger people that are dating in this landscape right now. I thank God every day I met my wife when I was young. But what made you focus on the courtship angle?
Yeah. I think, we see with tradition, and everything's been, jettisoned, with tradition, even in the church, and going back to biblical times, even Joseph and Mary, they engaged in a courtship. And so that, I think, just seeing, and also the fruit of dating, like what's the fruit? We see so many divorces going on, and cohabitation, same-sex marriages. And I think courtship, it's black and white, and I think with, Father Rippinger, I was able to use his, kind of his teaching, and he was gracious enough to endorse my book, and it's black and white. And I think, again, it keeps us, I always say the way our marriages turn out are the way we prepare for it. And so the courtship, and one other thing is it involves the father is involved. You're asking for the father's permission.
Yeah, why don't you explain what is the difference in courtship and dating? Like to court someone and date someone, what are some of the differences?
So courtship, again, it goes back. I mean, the first time that the word was used was like the 15th century. It just meant like an advisor to a king and queen, and then it developed into this idea of wooing a woman with the idea of marriage in mind. So I kind of define it as it's a period of serious discernment when you're looking to marriage. So I say the difference is that courtship looks to marriage as the ultimate end, while dating, dating is more on the present moment. It's kind of like how much pleasure can I get? You just go out on a date, but like, courtship's very intentional, and it's, you're looking at the person's virtue. I would say above all, like dating, you go out, hey, what kind of politics do you like? Are you, and that is part of the courtship process. But the fundamental difference, I would say, is courtship looking to the end, to marriage, and looking to virtue, while dating is more, just the present moment and pleasure. And the reason dating got introduced was, I think it was kind of a slang term where people would go out, and it became a popularity contest. And then as the automobile was introduced, that's how it came about. It wasn't really involved in sex as much as you see it is now, but back in the day, it was mostly popularity.
How would somebody in this era even go about, like, so this is real. I mean, I have to think that this book is geared towards men mainly, because it's like, if the man doesn't initiate the courtship, like if a woman wants to do courting, but her options are, it's just a very difficult time for women to probably meet Catholic men willing to go this route, right? So did you aim this mainly at men, or do you think women can lure men into this style of getting to know each other?
I did. I aimed it. I mean, I would actually, for both couple, for men and women, young people discerning marriage, but also I did aim it for married couples, just because I wanted them to see how madly in love these couples were with each other. And I think that's lost today, even in marriages. After the honeymoon's over, it's like, a man stops, in a sense, like we stop pursuing our wives. Like, you remember when we first fell in love, we ask our wife all these questions. We're just on cloud nine. And then after we get married, somehow it's like, we give our wife maybe one kiss a day. And, I think these saints, if you read this, it says St. Elizabeth of Hungary, when her husband would come home, on business trips, she would give him 1,000 kisses. Now, I'm not saying you and I, we make out in front of our wives, in front of our children.
How long have you been married, Patrick?
So I'll be 9 years in June.
So I'm 17 or 18 this summer. I don't even know. Don't let her hear. I was 17 or 18. I don't know. One or the other. But I always try to tell men, like, you still have to be adventurous, right? Like it's very easy to fall into a pattern of like just complacency when you're in a marriage. And it's like, if you don't, so especially when you have little kids, like you really have to find that time to take your wife to do something and spend alone time with each other, because you forget that you like each other. Like you forget that you're friends, because the kids are so consuming. And women, especially when they have kids, they tend to let the kids kind of take everything. And it's, if you really want to keep your marriage alive, you really do have to remain adventurous for your spouse, and you have to make sure that you take her to do things just the two of you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because, after your kids are out of the house, it's just, you and your spouse. And, I always think about that when you see these marriages fall apart after 30 years. I'm like, how does that happen? But it really does, because the focus was on your children.
Yeah. Yeah. So they gave us 4 questions, but I don't like the 4 questions. What do you think, Rob? You like these 4 questions? They gave us questions to ask you. They're like, I don't know, why is courtship important?
You're never one to listen to
I don't like listening
to the rules or guidelines.
What was your favorite story doing your research? Like, was there a story that stood out to you that you were like, okay, I want to emulate my marriage off this story?
That's a great question.
See, I'm better than the editors.
I know.
I gotta call Tan and tell them I'm in charge of their questioning from now on.
I know they give you softball questions. It's probably I helped give some of those softball ones, so I'm going to blame me for some of them. I was telling Anthony before the show, it's like you got to go back and read your book, because it's like, I wrote it over a year ago, and so I was telling my wife I don't even remember half of the stuff. But,
are you writing a new book already?
I'm trying, I'm trying.
So like the life of an author, like we were talking to Paul Figpin about this. It's like he went from writing a book about aliens and then jumping into writing a book about St. Joseph. And I'm like how does your mind go from aliens to St. Joseph? It's like the life of an author is just like constantly trying to find a good topic that you think people will be interested in, that you're interested in, to even do the research on, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, that was my job when I was at TAN as their editor. I would come up with a lot of the ideas for the books, and I'd go after authors. So it was kind of, in prayer time, the Lord would put certain ideas on me. So like Paul was one of our authors I went after for a couple ideas. I didn't give him the aliens one though. So that's why you see the mixture of some of these authors, but other ones, it's like they're inspired by like different topics. And so I think that this one, how do I say, like, the courtship one, I think I just avoided your question, but what did you ask again? Just the random, I think it's just, you're in different seasons in life, and like you see different problems in the church, or you recognize what you're going through and you're suffering. And maybe there's something, that God wants you to speak to the world. But I was telling my wife, by the time you write a book, people think like when you go write a book, you're going to become famous and make a lot of money, but you don't. It's like, it's almost, my wife's like, maybe you should go to Lowe's and like get a second job.
I would imagine it's really difficult. I mean, look, it's hard to come up with a podcast topic every week, right? We're over here trying to think of something to just talk about for 2 hours, but to write a book that people actually want to. So Paul Pereira just wrote an amazing question. This is actually a really good question. I know Rob has a few starred, but this one's really good. Oh, sorry.
This one?
So question for Patrick. Courtship is countercultural at the moment. Did you address the feminism issue to some degree in this book? Because like feminism really has affected all of us to some degree. I think even men, like even those of us who think, oh, we're not affected by feminism, I think a lot of us really are. Did you find any saints to be kind of countercultural towards that movement?
I did. There's 2 saints. Well, one is I put I used the revelations of Venerable Maria of Agreda. She wrote the great book Mystical City of God. Our Lady revealed her life to her. So in the story of Joseph and Mary, I talk about how Mary basically was trying to outdo each other in being submitting themselves to one another. And I think that there's your model of example. What St. Paul says, husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church and be submissive. So you see that submissiveness in Our Lady's life. She was the prime example. And then there was another saint in there that would ask her husband for permission when she was doing things, going out. And I do see that, like that docility, from women. And so that was subtly. I didn't want to make it like front and center in my book, but it's definitely in there. You can see, the life of even Saint Rita. Like, her husband is, he was verbally abusive. Now, no husband should be that way, but she responded in humility to that, and she patiently prayed for him. And I think it's a great lesson. And there was a couple other saints that, even times of arguing, they would do that discreetly. So I think, going back to your main question, I think Our Lady and Saint Joseph, that's in there. And then there's a couple other saints just with that submissiveness.
The problem for, I think, a lot of women today is that they're meeting men who aren't taking their role as husband seriously, right? So there's all these guys out there talking about feminism and the rot of feminism, but there really is a toxic masculinity out there where, like, if men think that you're going to get your wife to submit by telling her that you have authority over her, it's not going to. Like, that's, Rob and I have actually talked on this before. It's like, if you have to tell someone that you have authority, you actually don't have any. You may have, like, Rob, how did you say it?
Power is the ability to get someone to do what you want without any coercion. So
right.
If you're having to threaten, if you're having to declare that you have authority, well, then you have no actual power. Your power.
Whereas if you actually act like a man, and men are supposed to lay down their lives as a sacrifice for their family, like you really are supposed to do that. When you do that, a woman naturally will want to submit and follow your lead in things. And it's this weird play between, yes, feminism is very toxic right now, but men are not being men right now also. So it's, I was talking to my sister about this the other day, and it's like, you really do have to get men to step up and cherish their wives, man. It's like, your wife, like, she may stay with you because Catholicism says marriage, like, divorce doesn't exist, but you want your wife to want to stay with you. Like, it's, you have to still remain on some level romantic, sweep her off her feet at times, just kind of some of the things that you were saying.
Yeah. There, with Pietro Molla and Gianna, I put some of their love letters in there. After they got married, Pietro was an engineer and he came to the United States. They would write love letters almost every day to each other. And in one of the letters, he talks about their endless caresses and all this stuff. And I put a quote in there because, people don't talk about this, but Catholics have the best sex life of any group. Devout Catholics do. And I have that little footnote in there because people want to say, oh, that's, it's these young couples or people in Hollywood, but no, it is devout Catholics. And you can see it in Gianna's letter. And even with Louis and Zelly, she a couple of times she would say, like, I love you more than my own life. And I think that, like, you're getting back to is we are called to emulate men, like Christ's love on the cross, to be poured out for our spouses. And what that does is, in the life of Zoe Martin, like, Louis loved to fish. And so she would encourage him, go out and fish. And even when she was in cancer, she was in her final stages, she's like, please, like, just go and fish. That means a lot to you. And I think the more we serve our wives, and you see that in this book, the more we lay down our lives, the more that they are, like, more joyful, and then the more they want to support us. So
you wrote, so chapter 5 is called The Third Ring of Marriage. What is that about?
Yep. So that is, we know the first ring is the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and then the third ring is, I say, this is a joke, but suffering. So that suffering, I see, like, it's interesting. A lot of young couples, you'll see them on their wedding day, and they're like, and they should be, obviously should be one of the happiest days of your life, but I think they're just so naive to what's around the corner, and not that. But I think we don't think about the sufferings that happen in marriage. You don't think about miscarriages or even, unfortunately, spousal betrayal. There's an element with, with men with pornography or, other things. And I think it's a reminder to, that there's a huge cross in marriage, but that God,
Well, the thing you're saying with pornography, I say this not all the time, but it's like, if you get that out of your life as a man, your wife knows. Like, your wife can sense that. And there's something your wife will find really extra attractive about knowing she's the only one you have eyes for. Like, I know my wife knows, and she, it's like, if your eyes are looking in another place. Like your heart, you've committed adultery in your heart. You really have to understand that. And a woman can sense that. So if you're in a marriage and you're dealing with that, like that has to go. And I think a lot of men, when they're younger, they think, oh, once they get married, that temptation's gone. It's not gone when you're married. It's not. And it's a struggle. And you have to make sure you really draw a line in the sand when it comes to looking at that garbage, because it will ruin a marriage. It will destroy, it'll destroy the bond between you and your spouse. You are committing adultery.
And even like your children, that's what I think, you look at your daughter and your son, and, it's like, I want them to be pure, and like, unfortunately we see generational sins, that come down the family line. It's like, this has got to stop with me. And, but I think I did put St. Francis Borgia in there because, and another story I have.
Is he any relation to my favorite Borgia Pope or no?
I think he is right.
I love my Borgia Pope.
I think he's a nephew or something.
Yeah, something that he's related. But I have
Pope Alexander VI nephew became a saint.
I'm pretty sure.
So. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Told you guys he wasn't all bad.
But there's a Blessed Franz Joggenstocker. I screw up his name.
I know. Yeah, he has a very difficult name.
But what's neat about him is he messed up and he fathered a child out of wedlock before he met his wife, and I think that his wife took him in and kind of forgave him, his future wife.
So wait, this is Blessed Franz from World War II, right? Where he wouldn't.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I just watched, literally last week, we watched A Hidden Life, and I was so blown away by his wife in that movie. So it's like, it's one thing for you to endure martyrdom, right? It's another for your wife to support you in that act. And me and my wife were watching this, and we were both just like, because of course the movie's about Blessed Franz, but his wife, she didn't beg him not to do it. She gave him the blessing to follow his conscience. And like that in itself is a martyrdom. And I was so blown away by her.
Yeah. And then that's what I say, like her. And then even like, I say St. Gianna's husband, like if that guy's not canonized as saint someday, and St. Gianna's daughter believes that he will be, she calls him Holy Dad. I mean, he raised, 4 or 5 kids by himself, in his, he's upper 40s. And same with, Blessed Franz's wife, to raise 3 daughters by herself. And then I think she died at the age of 90 for like 60 years by herself. What a sacrifice.
I think St. Catherine of Aragon, I think Catherine of Aragon should be St. Catherine of Aragon. Yeah. So that's Henry VIII's wife, who had to sit back and watch him marry Anne Boleyn and put her basically to the side. And through all of that, she never once wavered in her faith and steadfast love for Christ. Like, I really think that Catherine of Aragon should be a saint and canonized.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, there's another story I have is Blessed Elizabeth Mora. She's kind of a lesser known saint, but her husband, they had 2 daughters, and then he just took off and ran off with another lady. And she kept praying for her whole life for his conversion. And after she died, he had a conversion and he became a priest. So, all these women out there, men, that are women that are like dealing with husbands that are, maybe betrayed them, or even men that have lost wives. It's like, keep praying for that soul. You don't know what God can do amazing things.
What were some of the courtships that transformed the church? What were like some of the significant marriages that actually transformed the church?
Yeah, I have Pope Benedict's parents, and Joseph and Maria Ratzinger, and they got married later in life. They wanted to get married younger, but with the Pope's father was kind of poor, and it took him a while he was in the military. It took him a while to save up money, so he was, I don't know, around in his 40s. And he actually, you're talking about online dating, but he put an ad in a newspaper, and this revelation was just revealed in the last couple of years. And his wife Maria saw that. He put it in. I should pull up the advertisement. It's in the book, but he just says like, looking for a pure, wife, and then one of the lines, knows how to cook.
That's funny.
And she was like 36 at the time, and they got married within. It was a few months later. And I think what's so amazing about that is his desire in his heart, obviously a pure woman, pure Catholic woman, that was his first priority. But then he also must know how to cook. Here, she was the daughter of a baker. She spent her whole life cooking. So he was like blown out of his world. So I think when you ask God, to meet your spouse, certain qualities you want, be specific. If you want to, make a good cook.
I mention this book all the time, but there's a book, Dominion, written by Tom Holland, where he goes, but he stop it, Rob. But he gets into St. Catherine of Siena, and St. Catherine of Siena had these ecstasies and saw herself as the bride of Christ, and she acted like there's a weird thing where she, like, her wedding ring was the circumcised, Christ for her wedding ring. But it actually helped the church develop its teaching and go deeper into marriage, because they were dealing with a lot of men being unfaithful to their wives. And I keep hitting so a lot of men being unfaithful to their wives and having, second marriages on the side, things like that. And it was really St. Catherine of Siena and her ecstasies that she had on marriage that helped the church go deeper and develop its teaching on marriage a lot, which I found interesting from a secular historian.
That's one of my favorite quotes in there. It was actually Jesus gave it to St. Margaret Mary, and he said, the cross is the bed of my spouses. And I'm just like, I'm blown away by that, because, we don't, some of that language, we don't think, oh, it's too sexual or something, but really, even Holy Communion, right? That's like a communion with Christ. And I think that through suffering, through these trials, like, Christ weds us, he weds his brides, and then even our own spouse, like, we become not only one body, but also almost, I would say, almost one soul with our spouse, right?
Yeah, especially if you read Brant Petree's book, The Bridegroom, where, the cross is Jesus's, like, it's where he consummates the marriage to the bride, right? We have all of this language from the church where we understand that marriage is a symbol of the divine. The Trinity is, like, marriage is how you actually participate in the divine act of creation by you and your spouse coming together. It's like, I really think we've lost the theology of marriage so much in our modern culture, and people really don't understand the significance of it. And I would imagine it helped your own marriage going through and reading some of these stories. Was it hard? Did you feel like you were falling short quite often?
Yeah, I did, all the time. Yeah, it's like, I tell my wife, maybe I wrote this book for me, to, like, this is what I need to do. I give a section in the back on, like, advice for married couples, and I'm like, there's probably a couple of them I follow. I probably should follow. So I'm preaching to myself when I'm writing this book, and I'm trying to think what others struck me. Well, someone, I saw the comment about St. Thomas More, and it was interesting. Like, after his first wife passed away, or let's go back to his first wife, that Jane. He could have married. So in his biography I was reading, there's 3 women, and he went to the countryside, 3 sisters, and the second one was the most beautiful one of the daughters, but he instead chose the oldest one, because he didn't want to make the middle child feel like envious, or that he overtook, made the oldest child feel envious because he took the middle one. So he eventually married the oldest daughter, who wasn't as pretty, but she was virtuous. And I thought that's, we need to be attracted to our spouses. And, but I think it just shows you the deeper level. Like, the saints were not concerned with the superficial, they were concerned with marrying a godly spouse. And then after his first wife passed away, he married an older woman, and Alice, within a month, he knew Alice most of his life. And here, she was actually ugly. That's some of the reports say she was very ugly, but she was wealthy. So I always say, like, if your first wife passes away, God forbid, but, like, St. Thomas More, he was just like this. She was virtuous, but he's like, I want to marry a wealthy woman that's virtuous, and that's what he did.
I think a lot of, because I see a lot of single Catholics interacting online, and I think that a lot of people have this false expectation that they have to have the whole package, like the man has to be 6'2" in great shape, and he has to be good looking, and he has to have all these other things. And I think if people really do look to virtue more than the superficial aspects, I really think it would help people a lot, because like you're saying, it's like there's no greater gift God could give you than a woman who actually loves God. And
towards the back of the book, Patrick has questions about how to choose a spouse, and going through them here, there's not a single one about how much money they necessarily have or what they necessarily look like. You know, it is all about virtue and, you know, how they act around children and things like that. So I think that is one thing that people in our day and age need to.
You pulled out some powerful quotes from the book today too, Rob. You have any of those?
Yeah, two of my favorites were both about kind of suffering. So there was God does not promise married couples a long, happy life together. Rather, he promises the cross on earth and then heaven for those who remain faithful. And then the other one I really liked was similar, was that the cross is the only remedy to the alarming statistic that nearly half of all Christian marriages end in divorce.
Yeah, those are pretty good. It's like, I think that it's a rough time for I think like my generation that like married their high school sweethearts and stuff like that. Like, so my kids, I have a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old. Like, I tell my kids, like, be careful how you treat your peers in school, because like I met mommy when I was 15. Like, this is like, you never know who you're going to marry. So my son has he has a girlfriend. He's not courting her. He has a girlfriend, but I'm always careful to make sure they understand, like, if this isn't serious and if you don't think this person is marriage material, like, do not waste their time. Like, it's not just about your time. Like, if you're dating this girl and you're not looking to marry her, don't waste her time. And remember that she is somebody's wife, whether she's yours or somebody else's. Like, you don't want somebody right now is dating your wife. Now, that could be the girl you're dating right now, but somebody is dating your wife right now. So you want them treat this girl the way you want whoever's dating your wife to be treated. And I stole that from Jason Everett.
I like that's a great, and even to pray for, your children's future spouse. I don't think a lot of, I didn't grow up with that mindset. I don't think my parents, and I don't think they ever prayed that often for my wife. I mean, but I think now they pray for their grandchildren's future spouses. But I'm like, hey, I could use some more prayers, but they definitely prayed enough. But I find it, with Zoe Martin, it was Lewis Martin. His mother had met Zoe at a lace making class, and he was a comfortable bachelor in his 30s. And she started praying like that he would meet Zoe. And I think, you see some of these mothers, like, when the kid's like 35 living at home, you're like, get out of the house, or they're like, you should meet married. You see a lot of couples, a lot of moms want to introduce their son to a daughter, to a wife. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, I think that I think, like you're saying, like, parents, especially like my kids are starting to get older, so it's like you don't want to tell them they can't meet somebody. It's a tricky thing. I'm looking forward to actually going through this book, because I want to see what I can convey to my own children. So it's like, at first I thought this was really for people dating, but really, as I'm looking even through the chapters, it's like, it's really for married couples too, and parents especially, right? If you want to help guide your children to find a good spouse.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's why I put the whole spectrum of stories in there, to help the couples that are maybe experiencing some kind of betrayal. And there are other couples that, like obviously with Joseph and Mary, to put some of the biblical stories. And then I'm trying to think of the other ones. I mean, there's just, John Paul II's parents. So just every kind. And one of the couples I have in there is really neat. They're the only ones that are still living today. And their name is Dr. Germain and Orchard Bianchi. And they were introduced by St. Padre Pio. And I wanted that story to show that, the saints are so powerful. Many of us would be like, man, I wish I had a saint to introduce me to my wife, Padre Pio. But, even in the story of Tobit, right, we see the archangel Raphael, who's the patron of finding a spouse. And I believe that the saints, like Padre Pio, is even more powerful in heaven now to meet your spouse. So, like, anyone that's watching the show that's looking to meet their spouse, like, pray to Padre Pio, pray to Saint Raphael.
Yeah. What were some of the saints that went to religious life after their marriage ended? Because, I mean, look, marriages sometimes end through death, and sometimes they're just, I mean, there are a lot of people who have a conversion after they had a divorce or something, right? Yeah. So, like, what were some of the great stories you read about, like, after marriage?
Yeah. So I had the one, Saint Rita of Cascia, right? Her husband was murdered. And then she always wanted to be in religious life, but her parents, said, you're our only child. We want you to take care of us. Which she was like, okay, I'll accept that. But then they're like, no, we want you to get married to this guy. So they chose a guy that wasn't even virtuous, and she obeyed them. And she didn't have to do that, right? I mean, she would have done nothing wrong if she would have just left, like St. Thomas Aquinas, right? Just kind of leave and follow the vocation. But she wanted to be obedient. And then after her husband was murdered, and then her 2 sons were killed, right? Then she ended up becoming a nun, an Augustinian nun. And then I have St. Francis Borgia. And then there's another story in here. His name is, let me put it up here, let me find it. His name is Blessed Jacopone. And his wife, he was a very prominent lawyer, and his wife, very virtuous. She wore a hair shirt for his conversion. And they went to this social event, and she ended up dying in a freak accident. And after she died, he saw the hair shirt on, and he was so touched by his wife's penance for his conversion that he ended up becoming a religious. And he is attributed as writing the Stabat Mater, one of the best prayers. Yeah. And so they called him Crazy Jim in religious life because he'd do all these penances. But his own wife, prayed for his soul and offered basically her life for his conversion, and he became a religious. So those are a few of the stories.
Well, that's pretty cool. So now when you met your wife, was she was a Franciscan student?
She was. So I was in graduate school, and then she was a junior there. So I'm 7 years older than my wife. So at first she saw heard my age, and she's like, nah, that guy's too old for me. But hey, I was like, hey, Teresa's parents, that's what, I put some suggestions in here. I put Louis and Zélie Martin 7 years apart. You have Pietro Molla, 10 years older than his wife. So I think some women, I got to marry someone that's only a couple years older. Now, if you're going some guy that's 20 years older, that's a little different. But I do think
I would say you want somebody that's mature, right? So especially if you're young, I don't think 7 years older is a problem. Now, did she grow up in did she have a religious upbringing? Did she have a later conversion? Was she on fire when you met her? What was?
Yeah, I mean, she's one of 13 kids. So I always wanted, I'm one of 3. And so I was I always wanted to marry a girl from a big family. And so she grew up, her parents, she grew up in Wisconsin, but she went to public schools. She wishes she was homeschooled. That didn't happen. So I think that's why she went to Franciscan to get out of pagan Wisconsin. I don't have pagan Minnesota, right? And so, I think, but she had been praying. It's funny. She heard Jason Everett speak in 8th grade, and that was the game changer.
Really?
Her parents never really talked. Even my parents, they never talked about sex with me, or even I think they dodged the question. And and so did her parents, but they took her to Jason Everett, and Jason Everett said, pray a memorare every day for your spouse. So she would do that. And that's why I put that in the back of the book. I put a prayer to the memorare to pray every day. So, every day to pray for your future spouse. And so, when we met, I mean, she was definitely on fire when we met there. And she had been, at Franciscan, there's a lot more girls than guys. So, I mean, there's some of the most beautiful women in the world there, and none of them have been pursued by men because a lot of them either are going to, seminary. And so it's the odds, as they say, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. That's what this kid told me. The odds are good, but the goods are odd. That wasn't my quote, but anyway.
Oh man. So when did the book actually come out? It just came out recently?
So it came out, the end of May.
End of May. Yeah. So they just released the audio version of the book. I bought the book on the Kindle. Rob got the hard copy. Rob, did you have any other questions you wanted to throw out there?
Well, so in the book, you go through the 4 stages of courtship as opposed to dating. And at definitely at 2 of the stages, you say to get that the man has to get the father's permission. What do you suggest a guy do if the father says no? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. And I think I do reference that in there, with Father, that was Father Rippinger's teaching in there.
Yep.
And I think, if the guy is, how to put it this way, if he's a virtuous guy and, obviously he loves the girl and she's virtuous and, and the father, I do think in that regard, I mean, and you absolutely love her and you're both virtuous. I mean, I think that you can go ahead. I mean, and disregard, the father's advice. Now, if he's given like a claim to you, like, oh, you don't have enough money to support obviously something like that, like a claim you don't have enough money to support my daughter, or something that's like ludicrous. I mean, that's where I think like, no, like this is God's will. But if it's a legitimate concern and he's saying to you, I mean, then you could take it to prayer, take it to your spiritual director or whatever, and reflect on that. Like, are you willing to, maybe it's an area in your life you need to improve on, that he notices something in you, like, hey, maybe he says, since you've been struggling with pornography or something, I think you should maybe wait a little longer to pursue my daughter. So I think those things have to be, they're case by case, but
yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, where can everybody find the book?
Yeah, so the book is available at Tan Books, and it's also available on Amazon. I know Tan likes to steer people more to their website, but both places it's available.
Yeah, I bought the Kindle version of it. So, Patrick, this is a fun interview. I'm a fan of the book. I'm going to finish reading it. And what are you working on next? What's your next book?
So a lot of them I keep under wraps just so the ideas don't get taken. But no, I have a couple children's books I'm working on, and then I do have a book coming out on like loss, dealing with child loss from fathers that's coming out this fall, and it's all these men tell their stories, and it's kind of, and I think that's the second greatest threat to marriage. These, after pornography and lust, I would say losing a child at any stage, and then. Now I was working with Father Calloway on a book in the future that, he's, I'm a contributor to that one. So those are a couple of the books that.
Oh, that's great. I love Father Calloway. Yeah. All right, Patrick, thank you. We'll put a link to the book up in our show notes. If you have anything else that you write and you want to come back on, let us know.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you both.
Oh, anytime, man.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.